All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of vBrownBag. This evening, we are excited to introduce you to Kristi Perreault. She is a senior software developer at Liberty Mutual, and you've effectively, Kristi, you've described yourself as basically an internal dev advocate within Liberty, correct?
Yeah, kind of like that. So I'm on our serverless DevOps team. So I work in the DevOps space specific to serverless enablement. Awesome,
cool. So this evening, we are going to be talking serverless DevOps, how to scale a serverless first initiative with Kristi Perreault. We had a conversation with her a couple of months ago now. And when I first approached her, she had a wonderful story. So we asked her to come on and share it with us, and she has deigned to do so. But before we get into it, let's go through the show notes. If you want to get in on the conversation, feel free to either at vBrownBag us on Twitter. Both Sean and I will be paying attention to your Q&A in the Twitter sphere. Or if you are in the live studio audience, feel free to shoot out either something in the Q&A or in the chat channel. If you want to follow Kristi, you can find her at kperreault95 on Twitter. She is also writing articles on dev.to, and she's got some really fun stuff out there as well. So once again, welcome to vBrownBag. I am Chris Williams. I highly discourage you from following me on Twitter. I am at Mistwire. I have nothing good to say on there. Basically just a whole bunch of holiday pictures for the past 2 weeks. I'm back from the island. Both Sean and I are back from the island. Sean, where'd you go?
I went to Kauai.
And so if you follow Sean at Cloud Osmotic, you will see some fun pictures from Hawaii.
Yes.
And if you're watching him right now, you see that he's got a nice little burn right there. You're looking a little pink tonight, Sean.
Yeah, I got some sun. I had to get it in. So
you also got a new job, didn't you?
Gray. I did.
Where are you working now, Mr. Doyle?
I'm working at WWT, and yeah.
What a coincidence! Welcome back.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. So let me stop my share. Ms. Perreault, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, you have the power.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I don't have anything fun in terms of islands and things. Oh, I'm on the wrong screen again. But you guys definitely sound like you did. So
we were so we have like a little Discord chat between the vBrownBaggers, and we were like sharing comparative shots of like island life for the past week, and it was ridiculously idyllic. I mean, we both haven't had a vacation in a very long time. And so we were able to get away, and some of the other hosts, ran the vBrownBags for the evenings those times. And we were very grateful for them for doing that. So we are relaxed and happy, and we had to come back so we could see your presentation, Kristi. We were definitely.
That's it then. Yeah. So are you able to see my screen? Can you see the presentation slides?
Yes, ma'am, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so as Chris mentioned, my name's Kristi. I'm a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. And today we're going to be talking about some serverless DevOps, how to scale a serverless first initiative. So just a quick introduction. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit about Liberty Mutual, some of the story behind serverless, some of the things that we're doing that's pretty cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about my serverless DevOps team, some of the procedures that we follow, some of our best practices, some of the things that have been working really well for us in the serverless initiative, serverless space. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're struggling and some improvements. And then I'm going to talk about kind of what's next for us for this year. And there will definitely be plenty of time at the end for some Q&A. So first of all, definitely not a pitch to work here, but I do want to give some background on Liberty Mutual Insurance if you haven't heard of us. So we exist to help people embrace today and confidently pursue tomorrow. And we do that by promising protection for the unexpected delivered with care. We have nearly 45,000 employees globally. And what a lot of folks don't know is that about 5,000 of those employees are actually in technology. So we do have a very large IT department. We're one of the top global property and casualty insurers, and we also rank on the Fortune 100 list. One of our kind of awards this past year was one of the top 100 best places to work in IT by Insider Pro and Computer World. And one thing I want to touch on, because it is Women's History Month, and next week is also International Women's Day, I want to talk a little bit about some of our diversity and inclusion efforts. So, and actually this is not completely up to date, because I believe 2018, 2019, and 2020 and 2021, we've had a perfect score of 100 for the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. And on top of that, we have been voted one of the best employers for diversity, for new grads, for women, and for LGBTQ.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So if you are looking for some more information on us, feel free to visit our website, lmi.co/tech, or definitely reach out to me after the presentation. So if you've not heard of me, my name's Kristi. As I mentioned, Senior Software Engineer at Liberty Mutual. I work on our Serverless DevOps and Enablement team. I've been in the space for a little over 2 years now, and I've been with Liberty for about 5 years, so 4 years full-time plus a 1-year internship. I hold a bachelor's degree in computer engineering, but I recently obtained my master's in electrical and computer engineering from Boston University last January. My focus there was in cloud computing, AI, machine learning, and a little bit of robotics. So kind of got a diverse background there. And I also obtained my master's while working full-time over the pandemic. So I wouldn't recommend doing that, but
Wow.
Definitely an interesting experience. I am an East Coast native, so grew up in New Hampshire, went to college in Rhode Island, and I spent about 4 years in Boston. And about a year and a half ago, I moved out here to Boulder, Colorado. So absolutely love the mountains, love being outside, hiking, skiing, mountain biking, pretty much everything and anything. Women in tech is something that is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm affiliated with the Women Who Code Denver Boulder group out here, as well as work on a lot of women in tech efforts internally at my company. And I'm out here permanently remote. So before I jump into our serverless state and kind of our current state of where we're at with serverless at Liberty, I do kind of want to level set a little bit here. I know not everyone on the call has serverless knowledge or a serverless background. I could probably do an entire presentation just on serverless and what it is and serverless first, but I'll give kind of a quick overview of serverless here. So kind of how I'm defining it and what you need to know for this presentation is just that it's a cost-effective, easy way to kind of configure resources in the cloud. It's a pay-as-you-go model, so you're not spending a ton of money on different things. You don't have to manage your own servers. And I want to really clarify that a lot of folks think that serverless is synonymous with Lambda functions. Definitely not true. You can still use Lambda functions, but just because you throw a Lambda function on something does not make it automatically serverless. I definitely wish it was that easy. But serverless is more about event-driven architecture, which is kind of exactly how it sounds. So your architecture is driven by certain events that happen, like creates, updates, or deletes. And that's kind of what you need to know for serverless in terms of this presentation. So going off of that, kind of our current state at Liberty Mutual right now, we have a centralized sort of marketplace or catalog where we surface a lot of different patterns and development efforts for serverless and for cloud as well. This really helps lower the barrier of entry to starting with serverless technology. And our kind of claim to fame right now is, you know, we can get any developer started in the cloud day one. In 20 minutes or less, they can have a deployable project out in the cloud. So part of these centralized patterns, this marketplace has really led to this rapid community adoption and this rapid growth. I actually just checked yesterday and I have some fun metrics on this. We have about 67,000 Lambda functions and 5,000 API gateways across a couple hundred different AWS accounts. So we've definitely grown substantially, and it's still growing. That number is rapidly increasing by the week. And some of these efforts have really led to some external recognition. And if you weren't aware, we were actually featured on stage at last year's reInvent, November 2020, as part of the CTO of AWS, Werner Vogel's keynote, talking about some of these efforts. So we're fairly mature in serverless, like to think that we know what we're doing. But I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. So what have we done that has led us to this point of this external recognition, this really refined marketplace, and this growing community of serverless? So this is where my team comes into play. Serverless DevOps is kind of what we have coined ourselves as. I've listed some of our roles and responsibilities here. You don't have to read through all of them. I'm going to go into each of these things into a little bit more depth in the following slides. But our team is really focused on enablement. We're a small group of currently just 3 developers that are working to help push the Serverless First initiative kind of across the board. And Serverless First is kind of a term that we've used to identify, serverless may not be the right fit for every single team, but we want to kind of embrace this idea of, well, let's try doing serverless first right away, and we'll see if that fits your use case. If it doesn't, that's totally fine. But I will say probably 90% of the cases I run into, serverless is a really good fit for at our company. Maybe some examples where you wouldn't use serverless first could be if you have some sort of vendor lock-in or potentially some really highly computational or long-running processes may not be the best fit for serverless, but I would say 90% of the work that we're doing at our company really embraces a serverless first sort of initiative. So I've alluded to this a little bit. Pattern development's kind of the first thing that we're focused on that we really work through. So as I mentioned on that first slide, we have these centralized sort of marketplaces and catalogs where we can surface these patterns pretty easily. So when I say patterns, I can kind of give an example in terms of our team. So we own what we call skeleton patterns, which are really basic, out of the box, don't have much to them, very bare bones. Getting started patterns with serverless. We haven't coined ourselves the AWS serverless team, but our organization is pretty mature in the AWS space. So a lot of our patterns are centric around those applications and tools. So CDK and SAM are 2 of our biggest serverless tools that we use. So we offer some out of the box patterns for those, both in Python and TypeScript. The reason for only creating these really bare bones basic skeleton projects is that we really want this space to be driven by the community. So we want other folks to contribute patterns, things that they're noticing and reusing quite frequently, and surface them through these catalogs for other developers to use and to promote that reuse. So like I said, we're really trying to enable developers on day one, lower that barrier to entry so that serverless and cloud is a little less scary. And get people up and running as quickly as we possibly can. The other great thing about these marketplaces is they are providing us with some great metrics. So we're able to see, kind of what our most popular patterns out there are, what our most popular architectures are, and what folks are gravitating towards most, so that we can see where there might be some gaps or where we might need some education or some more documentation, and a few other things that I'll go into.
Hey, Kristi, real quick, there was a question from the audience about sort of a little bit something you mentioned earlier. So you mentioned the high number of Lambda functions and I think I heard about 5,000 API gateways, across a few accounts. Does your team utilize, so across 100 accounts, I think I heard, right? Over hundreds of accounts.
So we do have hundreds of accounts actually. So I will get into this a little bit more. Definitely, Matt, I see your question. But yeah, kind of just an overview. Like we definitely do have we're starting to promote more of team level accounts, right? So when we got started with AWS, we started with these really overarching accounts that everybody was deploying to and using. And then, you know, as we've grown, we've quickly realized that those have gotten out of hand. They're really bloated. So we're trying to push more towards team level accounts. And when I say hundreds of accounts, I'm also including, you know, going out to different regions in each of those accounts and their different environments as well. So definitely something we're working towards, but yes, we're migrating from the large monolith account model to smaller individual team accounts at the very least. Thank you for that question, by the way. Yeah. So the next piece I want to jump into is our documentation, which is, I know, every developer's favorite topic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we document and then how we surface some of those things. So the first two are kind of hand in hand, how-tos and getting started guides. So this can be anything from, you know, getting started with serverless to how to adopt CDK, how to adopt SAM, kind of along those lines, any sort of, you know, just guides to follow. So these are popular. These are things that my team puts out and puts together. We've seen this come from the community as well and other teams. So these are two of kind of our biggest documentation efforts right now. Workshops is another big one. I know the CDK workshop is pretty popular externally. We actually had somebody at our company kind of take it and internalize it so that it works a little bit more with our ecosystem and some of our security constraints. So we have some internal workshops as well as promoting some external workshops, some things like a Cloud Guru and other videos, books. Examples is another huge thing. This one's probably one of my favorites. It's one of the easiest things to kind of show and to help folks out. Everyone really likes to do some hands-on stuff and some things that help them learn. So examples are a huge piece of this. And finally, well-architected has been a big theme within our organization lately, and we're definitely pushing for this more. So on one side, there's all of the AWS kind of well-architected documentations and their white papers. We also have some internal documentation on well-architected and how we handle our well-architected reviews that we also like to surface to our developers. So these are kind of all the basic like what's of serverless documentation. I'll go into a little bit of how we're surfacing these things. This might be a little bit of a controversial topic, but I really like having the documentation as close to the code as you possibly can. So we're big on READMEs on my team. We actually have a pretty standard README template that we use across all of our projects that give a good overview, tell what kind of resources we're generating and why, and then go into kind of how to build, run, test, in some cases, how to contribute to these projects. So this is a huge source for a lot of our documentation. Repositories go hand in hand with examples and kind of build off the READMEs as well. Your code itself is really documentation and helps others get started. Documentation hubs are another big one. So the AWS docs we rely on quite a bit. And then internally we have our own wiki spaces. And I know my team also shares ownership of a Git book that kind of covers what we coined serverless at Liberty and has some of these how-to guides, these getting started things, these workshops, kind of all live within this space, and it's linked out in as many places as we possibly can to promote the visibility of it. Architecture diagrams are another great way that we surface some documentation. So this could be lucid charts of some common architectures we'll see. A lot of them are with API gateways and Lambda functions, and then typically some sort of storage like an S3 bucket or a DynamoDB database. And finally, patterns, again, a common theme throughout. Our patterns do have pretty robust documentation in them to identify exactly what you're building, what you're going to get out of the box, the things you can customize, how to get in touch with the owners of the patterns, so on and so forth. So these are some of the prominent places to find some of our documentation. So continuing on our support model, when I put these slides together, these kind of 4 common themes were showing up: availability, community, feedback, and reuse. And they all kind of feed off of each other. So The first thing is our team tries to be as available as we possibly can. So this means, just including our contact information on everything we own, all our patterns, all our readmes, so folks are able to reach out to us pretty easily. We also support multiple streams of communication, so Teams channels, Slack channels, different groups, and we actually even have our own tag, so folks can reach out to us specifically as well. And this also kind of promotes some visibility because folks are really putting in their questions into these communication channels, and that's where the community piece comes in. We lean a lot on our community to kind of answer these questions and help out. As I mentioned, there's only 3 developers on my team, trying to support 5,000 IT employees. So it's kind of great to see that the community has kind of organically come together to answer questions and share things across the board, which ties in the reuse piece. So a lot of folks are turning around and saying, hey, like, I ran into this too, like I tried XYZ, it didn't work. This is the solution that worked for me. Here's a copy of, here's a link to my project so you can see how I did it. Hopefully this works for you. So it's really awesome to see some of this knowledge sharing coming through in the community. And finally, is the feedback piece. We really like to encourage two-way open communication. So one of the ways that we promote this and do this is through what we call a customer advisory board meeting, which we hold once every month. And we kind of give our serverless super users, I guess what you can call them, that represent different areas and departments across the board, some insight into what we're looking to do next, what we're prioritizing, where we're focusing a lot of our efforts, and give them a chance to give us some feedback, tell us where their developers are struggling, maybe what they need help with, and make sure we're just kind of on the right track and we're supporting and enabling the community as best as we can. Enabling constraints is another big one. So we actually have an internal application. It's called Radar. It integrates with our CI/CD tools, and it's kind of just a set of security rules or checks that goes through and just kind of checks in on our resources and make sure that we're being secure, that we're following best practices and best guidelines. So this actually encompasses a whole bunch of different resources. However, my team is obviously very specifically focused on serverless resources. Right now, that looks like Lambda and API Gateway mostly. So we're looking at things like, making sure that folks aren't trying to push a really old version of Node or Python that the cloud doesn't support anymore. We're making sure things like resource tagging is done. So that's pretty key for us to tie resources to certain teams and departments so we know exactly where we're spending money, what resources we're using. We can identify cloud tech debt, and that in turn kind of helps us identify potential security risks or vulnerabilities as well. Education is another huge thing. Lately, we've been really focused on kind of targeting, educating our tech leads to start with. This looks like a number of different things. First and foremost, probably the most obvious one is going through different trainings and workshops. As some folks know, in the serverless and cloud space, there is a ton of content out there, a ton of things to learn from, books, courses, webinars, videos. So we highly encourage a lot of that. We do what we call lunch and learns as well. So half-hour, hour-long sort of demos or workshops we walk through to kind of help educate our tech leads a little bit in this space. We really encourage experimentation across the board. So we kind of alluding back to that account question, we do have a sandbox account where all of our POC projects are happening, where all our experimentation is happening. So folks can go in there and kind of create these proof of concept projects, play around with a service or a resource. And we find that's one of the best ways to kind of get into the space and really get used to serverless and cloud in general, is to kind of have that hands-on experience. And then in turn, we want this to turn into building out architectures that make sense for specific teams so that our tech leads can become really examples to model, and that filters down throughout the rest of our developer community. And finally, talked about well-architected a little bit, but we're placing a greater emphasis on our well-architected reviews now that we have a lot of applications and services out there. So this is just a service that AWS provides that does kind of these checks against 6 different pillars. So we are trying to document that process as much as we can kind of internally as well, so that we know what to look for our applications at Liberty. One of the biggest things my team also owns is some metrics collection, and this helps us really make those data-driven decisions and prioritize our work. So as I mentioned, 67,000 Lambda functions and 5,000 API gateways. Where did that data come from? It came from us collecting that information out in all of our accounts. So we actually own a serverless application that goes through each and every one of our accounts and pulls this data for us. And the 3 things that we like to use this for is identifying tech debt, highlighting security concerns, and giving an overview of some cost. So for tech debt, this can be things like, I mentioned old versions a couple times. We can see last deployment time, so we know how out of date things might be or if stuff isn't being touched. Some of these things kind of bleed into that security pillar a little bit. Where we'll identify where there could be potential security vulnerabilities, things that we want to highlight. And this in turn kind of turns into some of our radar rules that we create. So we use these metrics to kind of drive some of those discussions and prioritize some of those rules. And then cost is the last one, and the one that the business cares about quite a bit. So we partner with one of our financial teams to pair up some of this so we can identify, if there's a large spike in something, we can kind of go back to our metrics and see where that might be happening. We look at invocations, we can look at memory size. So there's a few different metrics we're collecting here to kind of identify some of these areas and help us prioritize some of the work. So all of these things are really building blocks that build up to this idea of this really robust, growing serverless community. One thing I really want to highlight is our team has been pretty clear that we're not the community, but we are part of the community. So just to kind of emphasize, we really want our developers to be driving our backlog and what we're enabling and the tools we're supporting. So I like to say that we're kind of stewards of the community. So we're trying to get everybody on the same page. We're trying to put some guardrails in place in terms of security and radar and best practices, but we don't want to take that power away from the developer, and we really want them to surface their needs to us and have them drive the priority out. So this all sounds great. We're doing super well in serverless, but there are definitely areas where we're still struggling, things that we want to improve on, and things that we're kind of looking at going forward. One of the biggest ones is with day 2 development. So I had mentioned day 1 development, we can get a developer in the cloud 20 minutes or less. That's so awesome. They have a deployable project. They're super excited, but they're realizing that they need this resource or they need to be able to do this or integrate with that thing. So where do they go from here? What do they do now? And this is kind of driving at this idea that they actually don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. It's great that they've been able to create this pattern, push it out, deploy it. But if you ask them any sort of questions about the architecture, about how they're going to approach their solutioning, anything like that, they really don't understand how it works. So part of our job is kind of trying to help bridge this education gap. And that can be through a number of things like more of those documentation. We're talking a lot about kind of integrating some well-architected checks in here. And just overall, helping to educate our developers a little bit better so that they can make empowered decisions. So with that, there's this issue of scaling cloud education. So one of the biggest questions that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we help everyone across the board? So we have a lot of teams that are really excited about serverless, that are building out all serverless applications. They're really mature with it. But as I mentioned, there's 5,000 developers. So we have some in that space, but we also have a lot that are working on possibly legacy systems or haven't touched the cloud at all and don't even know where to get started. So as the small DevOps team of 3, how do we help everyone across the board and help enable the things that AWS announces on Friday that we want that our developers want to bring in by Monday, but also how do we get somebody started who hasn't even touched any of this? Along with that, how do we centralize all of these tools and these best practices? Serverless is popping up in many different areas of our organizations and our departments, and sometimes we're not even aware of it because there's just so much going on and so much out there. So how do we kind of find this one place where we can surface all of these things that every developer is going to go to, they're going to see, they're going to understand? So that's one issue that we're kind of trying to approach and understand a little bit for scaling some cloud education. And finally, how do we protect our teams? So this is a large ramp up process. As I mentioned, it's not just as easy as throwing a Lambda function in, it's completely rethinking how you're architecting your applications. And this does require a lot of learning and a lot of education. So how do we protect our teams from, putting out fires all the time and just building out new features that directly impact the customer? So how do we give them this opportunity to experiment, to learn, to grow, and to educate themselves on serverless? So this kind of goes hand in hand with consistency and reuse at scale. As I mentioned, we're getting a lot of silos of serverless popping up where, groups will come together and say, well, this is how we want to do serverless and this is how we want to run things. And it might be different than the best practices that are in another group kind of over on this side over here. So we want to make sure that we're encouraging a lot of this knowledge sharing and that folks are putting things out that we can all learn from and have these open discussions so that we can have kind of agreed upon standardization without being too rigid though. So we want to be able to still promote that innovation, that experimentation. We want teams to do things that are specific to their departments and their groups. But we have to be careful because with such a large company, projects can get shuffled around, passed from team to team. There's a lot of cross-team collaboration. So we do want to make sure that there's sort of a baseline of understanding and kind of a standard of best practices across the board. As I mentioned, cloud experimentation is awesome. We're definitely promoting this and we love cloud experimentation. As Matt already alluded to, one of the issues is that our accounts are really bloated right now though. We're pushing everybody to sandbox to experiment, and that's for everyone across the entire organization. So we have a lot of Lambda functions. We have a lot of kind of dead end resources, I guess you could say, sitting out on these accounts. And one of the things we're trying to promote is team level accounts or individual level accounts. However, this is a pretty large effort and it does require developers to go back and clean up their stuff and then create new pipelines and redeploy all their projects out into their own accounts and reconfigure. So it isn't always at the forefront of everybody's mind and isn't always prioritized, but it's something that we're working towards. It seems kind of funny to talk about tech debt in the cloud and in the serverless space since it hasn't been around very long. But as I've alluded to, it does exist. It's out there. We have a lot of folks that will create POC projects and just leave them out there if they forget to go back and clean things up. And we'll have things sitting out there for a while. And then that leads to security vulnerabilities, some risk. And obviously it's kind of collecting dust and taking up space in our accounts. So we're hitting account limits and we're hitting some cost issues as well. One of the other pieces with that, with the POC kind of work is not enough teams are reporting out what they're learning and doing that knowledge sharing. So sometimes we'll have an individual or a team go out and experiment with something and then they just kind of say, well, it didn't work, we're moving on. And they don't say why or how or some of the steps that they went through, or maybe it did work out and they're not really great at telling us why. So adding that kind of piece and almost closing the loop on experimentation is another big thing that we should be promoting a little bit more. And finally, again, making the time for this is definitely difficult with some of our teams that maybe have way too much on their plate, way too much on their backlog. and just can't seem to make the time to set aside and kind of experiment with something and educate themselves so that they can get to a serverless state. Okay, this is my last slide on kind of some of our issues that we're having. So buy-in from tech leadership is a big one. This isn't exactly like we're very sold as an organization on serverless first. I will say our leadership team is definitely pushing this. This is very big on our objectives this year. I think that the issue that comes in is understanding what that serverless first piece means. Again, not just throwing a Lambda function into something. It means re-architecting for event-driven. It means thinking about things differently. It means all of this education. It means all of this enablement. It means all of this support. And those things take time and they take effort. So that's where prioritizing that education and that work kind of comes into play. One of the things that we've run into as a team is kind of understanding serverless as a product of sorts. Traditional development teams are very focused on a platform and they're building out features on it and they're directly influenced by their customers. We're directly influenced by our customers, but we don't own a solid product. Our focus is always shifting. It's very dynamic and we're focused on enablement and trying to wrap your head around that and understanding that that still provides a lot of value when you're not owning a specific platform or product is definitely a tough idea, I think, for leadership to understand sometimes. So given all this, all of the good things we have going on, all of the things that we're looking to improve, kind of where are we headed? What does this year look like for us? What does scaling look like? This is kind of how I'm envisioning our future state. I don't have a step-by-step list of exactly what we're going to be doing and when, or a solid roadmap, but kind of the big themes that come out of this are, we know we're going to be collecting more data. We want to expand that and see, what else are folks using? Is it Fargate? Is it EventBridge? Are we even beyond some of the AWS stuff and we're starting to get into other cloud providers or frameworks or platforms? Definitely standardization and education across the board. Like I said, we want to make sure that we're centralizing all of our best practices, all of our tools without restricting too much so that it doesn't increase that barrier that we've tried so hard to lower, and make sure that folks are using those marketplace patterns, those software accelerator patterns, and kind of working through that. And then education, that's going to be a big theme, I think, throughout and forever. Tech is always changing. We're always learning. We're always growing. There's new stuff being released and announced, I think, just about every day in the serverless space. So this is going to be an ongoing thing that we're trying to work on scaling and working towards filling some gaps. And then finally, just expanding. So like I said, we have a lot of really mature serverless teams, and then we have a lot of teams that haven't even got started with the cloud. So we really want to expand our reach as much as we possibly can and identify all of these serverless silos and kind of get everyone on the same page and just grow outwards. And then that leads to kind of our empowered developer who's here and can make those decisions and provide value and really tells us and our team what we need to do to enable them and where they need the most help. So that's it. I feel like I've been talking forever. I'll say thank you. Thank you for having me. Definitely plenty of time, I think, for some questions. First of which I'll answer. This is taken at Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park here in Colorado. So I mentioned earlier, I'm a big hiker. So that's where this picture is.
You knew that was going to be my first question.
Yeah, I knew somebody was going to ask. So that's where this is taken. Had to throw in some hiking there. Yeah, my Twitter handle's up here, my LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on both of those. So yeah, I think that's everything.
Cool. Okay. Well, we do have a stack of questions. Sean, do you want to chip away at them? You want me to take them? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I guess one question I have really quick, Kristi, is given your experience, in this, and you had that future the 4 circles there in that future state slide. What do you think is going to be sort of, or what do you think, which circle, if you had to give weight to like one circle of what's going to be, in your opinion, the most challenging circle, what do you think that would be? Is it the data collection, the standardization? Like,
yeah, so I definitely think the standardization is going to be the hardest thing, because it's such a fine line to walk. So, you know, we're seeing CDK is one that I kind of kept mentioning, but we're seeing that as like what developers are really gravitating towards, and that's what they want to use. But we don't want to like force that on everybody, right? So like there's some teams that really like CloudFormation templates still, or SAM, for instance, or using things like serverless framework. Which is totally fine. And we want to encourage teams to like use the best tools for the job and what works best for their teams and what they're supporting and what their architecture is. So kind of agreeing upon that standardization, I think is going to be a really tough thing to do. I even know like within the CDK community as a whole, like it's not necessarily agreed upon about what the exact project structure should look like. And teams do stuff a little differently kind of elsewhere. So kind of walking that fine line is going to be a tough one, I think, this year, definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's so many tools and ways to do things, and they're always constantly changing. So thank you for your perspective on that.
Yeah.
So we've had a few in the audience. I think I'll start with Mike. He asked, I think you answered this already, but do you work with a cloud infrastructure? Oh, do you work? No, actually, I don't know if maybe you did, but maybe I missed this as well. But do you work with a cloud infrastructure team that manages AWS and sort of you help enable the developers, but there's another team that, you know, does the, like governance, or and another team that does security? Like, what does that sort of structure look like?
Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, serverless DevOps. So we roll up to the secure DevOps department. So there is an AWS cloud infrastructure team that does manage that governance, and like, you know, they kind of handle the creating new accounts. They actually own that Radar application I was talking about, but we do partner very closely with them because AWS is the thing that's most mature. But we do have like an Azure team as well, a Google Cloud team. We have other folks that, you know, have the potential for building out a lot of serverless applications in the future. As a company, we're just not there yet, and AWS is what most folks are familiar with. But yes, they handle more of that kind of day-to-day, the governance, the kind of IAM piece, a lot of those different aspects. So we're specifically, if it's serverless related, we will be tied into that and work with them pretty closely.
Okay, great, thank you. Roger White asks if you are familiar with any serverless trainings or workshops that you highly recommend. And if you don't happen to know those off the top of your head,
branded ones.
Yeah. If you don't know those off the top of your head, I mean, any that you could recommend, we could put that in the show notes later for sure.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely love a Cloud Guru. We use that one a lot. I know it's kind of expensive for an individual membership, but I've definitely, I'm actually going through one of the certification trainings for AWS right now through it. And for free resources, I do really like using the like reInvent videos, the previous reInvent videos. Those are great for like deep dives on specific serverless tools and services. Yeah, otherwise, I feel like there's so much out there. The CDK workshop I talked about a little bit too. There's such a mix of just like free resources and paid resources and all sorts of things. So yeah, those are the key ones that come to mind.
Nice.
Okay.
Another one is from Matt Morgan. How much of your team's time is spent actively working with helping individual teams getting up and running versus spending time building out patterns and documentation for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. It's probably one of the hardest ones that we have to answer because it's such a split and it's so mixed. We're very dynamic, and with only 3 of us, so I'm for reference, I'm kind of the mid-level. So we have a junior member and we also have a tech lead that we kind of split responsibilities with. But for a while there, it was kind of all hands on deck on each thing we were doing. So, we'd be focused on patterns for like 2 or 3 months, and then that's all we're doing for 2 or 3 months. And then we switch gears and we're focused on building out a radar rule, and that takes us another 2 months. So we're just starting to get to a point where we're more mature, where we can kind of split work off and work 2, maybe even 3 efforts at a time. But it's definitely a mix. We don't want to become the patterns team. We don't want to become the radar team. And I'll say, like, right now too, one of the unique opportunities we've had is there's some teams in our department that are getting more up to speed with serverless, and they need a lot of hands-on help, and their highest priorities in our department. So we've been asked to kind of one-on-one consult and be on loan as developers over with other teams to kind of help them get up and running. So we'll do that for a couple months at a time too, and send one person over. That's a relatively new idea we've been playing with. So I can't give a firm percentage because it's always switching and moving, but yeah, we're definitely still coding out things. It's kind of cool. We do get to innovate like a ton. Like I said, AWS announces something maybe on a Monday, and like Friday innovation time, we get to use it to play around with the tool and kind of do some of those POC projects and see where we can integrate it and what it's going to take to enable it within our organization. So really cool space to be in. It definitely moves a lot. You definitely need to love learning.
That's awesome. All right, so we're all going to go work at Liberty now, right? Is that how this works?
I do help with interviewing, so I know this isn't a pitch to work here, but you can also ask me about that, offline. Happy to answer those questions too.
And you started in New Hampshire at Liberty, right? Were you in the Portsmouth office?
Yeah, so I interned out of our Dover, New Hampshire office for a summer, and then I moved into our Boston office for about 4 years, and then I switched to the permanent remote. So my team's completely geographically split. We're all over the place.
Very cool. Yeah, I live in Stratham, so I've actually done work with them as consulting. So actually one of the other user groups that I help with has several directors from the Liberty office in Portsmouth. So
we're big in the Portsmouth. The Seacoast space is huge there. Yeah, that's probably one of our largest tech offices.
Yeah, bunch of good people there.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So Colorado photos, always good to share. Thanks, Rob. Great presentation from Robert. I think we have gotten all the questions
I don't think I'm looking at the chat. So I think, Roger, you asked another question about the metrics and if we build out our own custom dashboards. So yes, right now we're using we utilize Power BI. That was new to me. We had to learn that. So I kind of built out my own our own dashboard to highlight some of the key metrics, and then just like include a table that lists everything out. So that's how it is right now. That's actually one of the processes and things as part of that data collection piece for this year's roadmap that we're looking to kind of change. So as we're expanding on that, we really want to integrate that a little bit more with our individual developers rather than just sending them a link to a dashboard and say, find your stuff. It's a great overview for us to use and a great way for us to kind of prioritize stuff. But we're trying to think of different ways to kind of get that out in front of the individual developers or teams or applications a little bit easier, so that it's right front and center for, hey, you have an issue with this, or, there's a spike in this cost, what's going on. So we do build out some of our own dashboards utilizing the Power BI tool right now. But I'd like to, other than overviews, we'd like to shift that to be a little bit more individual.
Nice. Cool. Thanks. All right. And thank you, Kristi, for catching that question. I missed that.
I was excited to answer it. So
you're doing a better job than we are. You've got a job as a vBrownBag host if you ever want it.
I'm sure you want to hear me talk more. So
I do. This stuff is fascinating. Actually, I think it would be really fun to watch you do one of the lunch and learns that you do at Liberty Mutual. That would be like super fun. But I wouldn't be able to get in there.
No, sorry, I can't swing an invite for that. I wish.
I know. It's funny you say that, because I actually tried to I was consulting there, doing a vRops deployment for the other side, and I was like, hey, you guys are doing an AWS thing. Can I get in on that? They're like, no, you can't. You can't come over. I was literally like the room over.
Yeah, it's tough. We're a little under. I mean, I alluded to it a lot, but we're insurance, so we're working with a lot of insurance data and claims and a lot of sensitive info. So we got to be careful about what we share, and kind of be careful about our security.
Totally understand. Cool. All right. Well, Sean, was there anything in the tweetosphere? Did you catch anything from there?
I did not. No.
Nope. We're clean. Awesome. You were gonna say something, Sean?
I was, and I forgot. Sorry.
That's okay. We can ping her on. We know what her Twitter account is.
Yeah, so I was gonna say pretty visible. I love to talk, so you can always call me.
Well, Kristi, it was wonderful. It was wonderful talking with you. Thanks for coming on and sharing that information with us. I am now going to go tap into the A Cloud Guru serverless stuff, because you've gotten me excited to learn some new things here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. Cool. This was also my first. You guys had an exclusive, so this is my first run through with these slides. So anybody has any feedback for me, definitely feel free to reach out.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, folks, if anybody has feedback, positive feedback on the slides, feel free to @kperreault95 her. Cool. All right. Well, folks, once again, you've wasted a perfectly good hour listening to me and Sean rant, but you spent some great time listening to Kristi talk. I need to work on that joke. Do you remember Click and Clack, the Tepper Brothers on Car Talk on NPR, Kristi?
No, I don't.
they used to have this line at the very end, and they were hilarious. And they at the end they would say, "Once again, you've squandered a perfectly good hour listening to us." And I always got a giggle out of that. And every now and then I try to bring that out, and it always falls flat. I'm not a good comedian.
You got to nail it one of these times.
I'm gonna keep trying. I'm gonna keep trying.
I'll be on again, folks. So you just got to do it then.
Are you coming on? Well, you're gonna be on the Boston user group.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'm on this one again too.
Wait.
They have me on the schedule again.
That's right. I booked you twice. I was so greedy. I was so greedy with you. I was
You're still on vacation brain, I think.
I totally am. We only got back yesterday morning, and I'm tan. I'm happy. I'm still. Are we recording? I'm going to stop recording. Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.